Warning! Warning! This podcast contains spoilers.
Listen at your own risk.
Welcome to Medium Shift, the podcast that investigates how stories stack up from medium to medium through the adaptation process.
This episode, we're going to be delving into the Italian underworld, the LA underworld, in The Italian Job. Welcome to Medium Shift. I'm Chris.
And I'm Ev.
So, The Italian Job, the 2003 remake of the 1969 film of the same name. Let's move briefly into a short plot synopsis. After being betrayed and left for dead in Italy, Charlie Crocker and his team plan an elaborate gold heist against their former ally. Sorry, I just realised his name is Charlie Crocker. International thief and stealer of gold. Charlie Crocker. That's not a name I can take seriously. Much like a lot of other things in this film, if we want to delve into what we actually think about it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it suits perfectly with the other fantastic names of the heist crew, like Handsome Rob, Left Ear, and The Napster.
Okay, you've got me there. There's a bit of a theme.
Yeah.
Not that any of them are good, but anyway. Yeah, so what do you think of the 2003 version of The Italian Job?
I was pleasantly surprised when I watched it. My biggest thing is with heists movies, they're not really something you can adapt in the stricter sense, because the whole appeal of the heist is you don't really know what's going to happen. It's sort of like, oh, this is the plan. Oh, the plan has gone wrong. Let's improvise. Climax. Or
sure.
something
Or we don't even find out the plan. And
yeah.
we, the audience discovers the plan at the same time everyone else is over the course of the film too, so, yeah.
Yeah, all parts of the plan are left out strategically to sort of make it look like it's gone and failed, but really they've been out the door the whole time.
Yeah, of course. It's like that Community episode where they plan a heist, and they're going to plan a heist that makes it look like the heist has failed, but in doing so, the heist has actually succeeded.
And then fails.
And then failed again. Brilliant. Yeah.
But yeah, so it was going to be difficult, and I like that what they've done is, I think they've hit the right sort of point for adaptation in that it's clearly inspired by, but still very different to the original. So it had some of the key features of the original, the Mini Coopers, the traffic jams, and the chasing the cars in and out of streets and train
and the
subways.
Gold in the opening sequence as well.
Yes,
yeah,
of course. But then everything else was very different. Like the fact that it doesn't take place in Italy and deals with, instead of like evil Italian mafia and stuff, it's like one of their own, and there's a bit of a, I don't know how great it was, but it was nice it was different. Yeah,
sure. I think you kind of hit the nail on the head, honestly. Like the director, F. Gary Gray, has basically committed it's a homage to the original. It's not really a remake, which makes it interesting to talk about in regards to an adaptation. But honestly, it's weird because like a loose American remake of a British classic that's like, really laddie and quintessentially British onto itself, that takes place in LA and stars Marky Mark. Like, this movie shouldn't be any good. Like, this should be terrible. And yeah, I was kind of the same, that it's like, I wouldn't call it a great film, or maybe even bordering on a good film, but I think it was like a perfectly fine, surprisingly entertaining and slick heist movie, basically. Which was weird. Like, I was not expecting that at all, out of, like, looking at this film and finding out about it. It has all the hallmarks of a really, really terrible, like, kind of Point Break remake, where everyone forgets about it in 2 years' time. But no, it's actually a little bit more worthwhile than that, which was genuinely surprising, so.
I think one of the other points that I like about this film is most heist movies sort of end up on a spectrum, in my opinion. There is the heist comedy and the heist action. And every heist movie fits somewhere along there. And I feel the original Italian Job lent more into heist comedy, whereas this one lent more into heist action. And I think that's probably for the better. If they went with a comedy, it would have been Americans trying to do English comedy, and we've been over this before. It doesn't really work.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it was nice they let in, and they brought in like a more action-y cast with Marky Mark and Jason Statham and Charlize Theron. They knew what they were doing.
Yeah, of course. And I think it kind of benefits in the way that, like a lot of remakes which are being constantly compared to the original, basically. It avoids almost all of that by being so inherently different that it's almost impossible to compare the two. Like the narrative
And
arc
yet we're going to try.
And yet we're going to try. That's the whole point of this podcast. Yeah, so I mean, the setting is completely different. The crew is completely different. Like the emotional arc, like one of them is literally just doing it for the money, basically, and for name recognition in the original film. And then this one is much more of a personal vendetta, which is obviously the emotional stakes are so much different as well. Like, there's so many significant changes between the two of them that it is really difficult to kind of look at them as, you know, original and remake, basically, because it's not really the case. The Italian Job, like, they literally could have called it anything else, and people would have said, oh yeah, it seems like there's a few references to the Italian Job, but it's its own movie. It's the fact that, what I found really interesting about it is the fact that they very much labelled it as an Italian Job remake, and did those specific homages that, makes it an interesting adaptation. And the cynical side of me thinks that that's basically just for the name recognition, honestly, because people are much more likely to go see a remake of the Italian Job than just Joe Blow the heist movie or something like that. So
yeah, it was probably something they had to do for the money, just to get it funded in the first place.
Well,
because from what I heard, the writers, the original writers, that was making a much more direct sort of
sequel to the original.
Yeah, and they ended up getting the boot, and they brought in two writers, and they went, yeah, we want to make our own, basically, and like, yeah, but it still needs to be the Italian Job. So they watched it once, and that was it.
And then, didn't they adamantly refuse to watch it again, basically? Yeah, basically. So, yeah, they literally only wanted, like, the surface elements and then make their own film.
Yeah, so I think this was a heist film disguising itself as an homage to,
to the original.
The original, yeah.
Yeah, that's fair enough. And I do think it's interesting to talk about in that respect. One thing I do want to mention, as you briefly brought up there for a moment, that there was an original sequel planned for this movie, essentially, which is, as everyone, like, we haven't actually talked about the original that much yet, but as everyone who's seen it knows, the iconic ending, basically, when the gold is on the edge of the precipice and they have to save it and such. Reportedly, that ending was concocted because, at the time, censors refused to let criminals win. So basically, in any film with a criminal, starring criminal and such, they had to get their comeuppance in some time during the movie. You couldn't leave the film and look like, and make them out to be the heroes in that respect, which is why that ending exists there. But apparently, they also did that ending as well as a setup for the sequel, and that the gold would eventually, everyone would get out of the van or the bus. The gold would fall down, and then the Italian mafia would basically reclaim it, and then the whole heist in the second film will be trying to recapture it from the Italian mafia all over again, which makes it really interesting, I think, the fact that this movie starts with a heist of essentially that gold in Italy from the Italian mafia. So in a way, it's almost in a meta sense of alluding to the potential sequel. It's referencing the fact that it is kind of a spiritual successor in that way. Which I think is, legitimate. I don't know if it's intentional. It might have just been a homage and it just worked out as sort of like a happy accident, but I do think it's really interesting how it references it that.
Well, there's also the interesting point that both the original and this sequel they came up with sequel ideas for them during the production, both called The Brazilian Job.
Yep. That never came to pass.
Yeah. And yet, so many times people say it's still not off the table, even like for this one.
Yeah, I think like 2 years ago, Mark Wahlberg said in an interview or something, it's like, oh yeah, it still might happen.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Which means it's probably never going to happen because he has no say over where that movie gets greenlit. But anyway.
But there's still hope.
Yeah, sure. Would you watch a sequel for this?
I probably would, just out of curiosity.
Yeah.
I do like a good heist film when it's done well, and they showed that this was possible. Yeah. For a heist film.
I think heist is one of those genres, for me and probably for a lot of other people, as you mentioned, like, it immediately just gets more points. Like, I'm slightly more interested in a film once I hear it's a heist film, even if the film doesn't look particularly good. So, yeah, it would be curious to see, but I really think it would depend on the creative team and who they got back. Like, if they got the same director, like F. Gary Gray has gone on to different things as well, like, it could be legitimately interesting, so, yeah. No, it's curious to say. If we want to move into quickly our thoughts on the original as well, just to sort of premise where we're coming from in this. What do you think of the original Italian Job?
Well, I surprisingly watched this when I was quite young as part of my parents' education. They showed me all what they thought were classics, and that included a lot of Michael Caine.
Of course.
Well, the stuff that I could watch.
Oh, yeah, fair enough.
At that young age. And I loved it. It was not fully memorable to me, but there were a lot of like key moments and quotes that you sort of stick with. Like, the classic, you're only meant to blow the bloody doors off. And guys, I have a great idea. So it was kind of one of those things where even going into watching the remake, that I'm like, even I only just remember surface details of this. I didn't fully remember the motivation behind it and stuff. I just remembered the chase scene, the going through the tunnels, the gold, the Mini Coopers. And I think that's possibly one of the reasons why I thought it was quite different for the remake, was because of that. I was going in with different things. Yeah, it was very much more, as I said earlier, the original was very much more comedy based. I feel it had its action, of course, but a lot of the things were very much. I mean, it starred Benny Hill, for Pete's sake.
Yeah, of course.
You're not going to be totally drama action heavy when you have Benny Hill in your cast.
Absolutely, it's kind of almost forcing a tone on at that point. Yeah, I think you're right. I think the original has like kind of a cheekiness to it. In that respect, would be the best way to describe it. I'm coming from a slightly different perspective in that I actually saw the remake before I saw the original, funnily enough. Just coincidentally, like I think my dad was watching the remake at some point, and I was just kind of joined in. And then I watched the original Italian Job quite a bit later. And I mean, I like it as well. I think it's very much a product of its time.
Oh, absolutely.
You can kind of see the influence of like the British Rat Pack and James Bond and everything like there in that, basically. But I think in doing so, there's almost like a charm to it, I guess. Like a vaguely misogynistic charm to it, but a charm nonetheless. And obviously Michael Caine is great, and the heist sequence is really fantastic as well, and there is a lot of really funny, silly moments in there too. I do think it's quite bloated, to be honest. Like there's a lot that I really think that's just kind of the way movies were made in that era, but there's a lot of things, like narrative things, that could be kind of trimmed down and don't lead anywhere and everything like that. Like meanders around a little bit in the first hour or so. Yeah, for the most part, I do think it's a legitimately good movie, and I understand why it's a film that just kind of withstood the test of time, particularly regarding that last like half an hour or so.
Oh, absolutely.
No, I do think it is really quite interesting. So, do we want to get into the specific differences between, or the specific references, shall we say?
Right.
Yeah, the remake and the original. Yep.
So, in terms of the differences, it's because so much of it is different. It's probably better to talk about the similarities.
Well, sure.
In the sense, so what the similarities? First and foremost, the minis.
Yeah. Of course.
They've become a staple of the original, and of course, if you're going to bring something back from the original, it has to be the Mini Coopers.
I feel like there would be a riot if there was a remake of the Italian Job, or any sort of related thing to the Italian Job, without the Mini Coopers, basically. Yeah.
And they were updated, which is nice, but they still kept the colour scheme, the very British colour scheme, which I think weirdly transfers well to the American, because it's the same three colours.
Yeah. Funnily enough.
Yeah. And they had nice explanations there as to why they brought in for this heist. So it fit in well. They made it fit in well for this story, I feel.
Yeah, of course. It feels appropriate, and yeah, as we kind of mentioned, you need to kind of have the Mini Coopers in there at the very least, and it makes for probably the most entertaining sequence in the film, much like the original, basically too. It's really ingenious product placement. Like I was looking it up as well. Apparently, like Mini Cooper sales increased by a good like 20 or 30% after this movie came out, considering they're so
remake?
integral. The remake, yeah, considering they're so integral to the plot, and everyone just thinks, oh, they're really, really cool. Because that's one of the things people think about when you mention the Italian Job, basically. It's kind of like the quotes. It's so much an iconic part of the film, so...
Well, it's interesting that you brought up the spike in sales of the minis after the remake, because one of the things about the original was that Mini didn't really want to support it. They wouldn't give them the cars. It was very much just, if you're using them, you're paying for them and you're paying for the license.
Interesting.
Fiat, on the other hand, the Italian Mini company, just went, yeah, we like this movie. We see the potential. Take what cars you need.
Right.
So why you have Lamborghinis and Ferraris and basically Fiats everywhere else in the movie, it was because Fiat basically went to the original and went, yeah, take what you need. This will work out for us. And so that helped Fiat kick off.
Yeah, sure. And yet the cars that people remember about that movie are the Minis. God, Fiat must be pissed about that.
Well, they're doing pretty well at the moment.
Well, yeah.
And they're part of the same company that did a lot of the other Italian classic cars and stuff. So they got a bit of a...
Yeah.
The fact that all their luxury cars kept getting references.
Sure, that's a very fair point. Yeah, I'm sure they definitely got a little bit of a boost. But I do find that like quite funny, to be honest. Oh, man. That's really interesting. Good stuff. If we want to move into the other thing I wanted to talk about in regards to... Obviously, we mentioned already the original heist. But the fact that... the remake kind of transposes the Italian Job heist to Los Angeles heist, which obviously we have mixed feelings on, considering the film was called The Italian Job.
I didn't mind it as such because I felt that now they're just alluding to the first heist that they did, and it's like, oh yeah, The Italian Job is the thing that kicked off the rest of this. But like in regards to it directly referencing the old one, I'm kind of like, eh.
Yeah, I don't know. Part of it rubs me the wrong way because it almost feels, considering it's an American remake, it almost feels culturally imperialistic.
Yeah.
In a way that it's kind of like, we're going to move it from this really, classic Italian European city to literally the hub of American entertainment and gluttony, Los Angeles. It felt, I don't know, it rubbed me the wrong way quite a bit, to be honest, I think.
Did you find there was any sort of imperialistic overtones with the original? I'm interested to find.
Yeah, there's a little bit of that as well. I mean, any sort of film that deals with a bunch of quintessentially British guys going to another country to steal a lot of their wealth is going to bring up some curious undertones, I think. I don't know if it's quite as... I don't know if it's intentional in the original film.
Yes, it was.
It was.
Well, not
really
imperialistic, but it was very much a us versus them type scenario, and that's why they still went with the minis even after they were told they had to pay for it instead of going for the Fiats, because they went, we basically just want very British people entering this very vibrant European setting and just watching what happens when two very stark cultures clash.
Which I guess makes sense why they made all the minis in the colour of the Union Jack as well. Like, that feels like almost a quintessential middle finger to the Italians. So that's
and
interesting.
the minibus at the end, that's littered with the red and white arrows and blue things.
Yeah, of course. I mean, didn't
the hooligans?
Oh, boy. Yeah, that's... okay. That's really interesting.
So in another way, it's a weird homage this remake has made.
That makes me feel even grosser, to be honest. Oh, that's not fun.
Product of its time.
Yeah, I mean, I guess part of it as well, that because America is in a more privileged position when it comes to films and entertainment, which is maybe why that hits me a little bit harder in that respect. And just generally speaking, the words American remake have a negative connotation to it in so many respects, where compared to British films and sensibilities, it's not quite as pronounced. But even so, that's a very interesting parallel. Don't know if that was intentional. I really think the remake was probably a little bit tone deaf by the fact that, Americans, which frankly happens a lot. What, the rest of the world exists? Who knew?
Surprise!
Surprise! Doesn't everything just happen in LA, obviously? Especially in relation to a Hollywood film. Yeah, okay, that's interesting. I wasn't actually familiar with that, but that actually makes a lot of sense. Yeah. What, in regards to kind of the heist that happens at the end of the remake, like we sort of touched on it briefly in regards to, there are definitely kind of bare bones structured references to the heist in the original film, the most prominent being the traffic.
Yes.
As well, obviously,
So the traffic, as you brought up, was the classic. They control where the armoured cars containing the gold go by just selectively turning on and off traffic lights. In the original, it was very sort of subtle the way they did it. It was just they sort of copied over control, took out some of the security cameras, and that's what sort of caused the accidents. And they, with select destruction and a few choice switches, they kept things subtle, but they were sort of known near the end of it that something was going wrong.
Sure.
Whereas the American, it's very much, haha, we've hacked your system. This is me now. I'm in control.
I am the Napster.
You are my puppets.
Yeah.
You are going to turn left now, and you do.
Of course, yeah. See, as much as I don't mind Seth Green, I think Seth Green is fine. His character I found quite a bit grating, to be honest. And I think part of that... See, both of these films are very much products of their time in some respects. And the way you're sort of referencing, oh, look at Hacker Man over here, is very much a product of, like, 90s hacker culture influence in Hollywood and just the rise of the digital age basically going into the early 2000s. Because obviously they're not going to do a sequence like that in 1969.
No.
Because it would not be physically possible. Like, the whole concept of hacking in that respect doesn't exist back then.
No, they used magnetic tapes in there.
Yeah, of course. So, I mean, the fact that they go so hard into the hacking thing makes sense considering the era it's set in. Even if I think the way they did it was a little bit obnoxious, and the fact is like, oh, look at you, you're going to turn right now. Oh, he's turning right, I am a genius. And then the whole words up on the screen and everything, like, really kind of...
Grandiose.
Yeah, absolutely. And I maybe if we skipped over sort of a critique of the film, Even though if I found this film surprisingly entertaining, I still think it has a lot of problems, and I don't know if I call it a particularly good movie, because it is very much kind of cheesy, indulgent, shallow comedy and action and such, in that it's very much, all the characters are kind of like stereotypes in their own way that are playing up to these certain like traits and such. Seth Green is obviously a good example of that, but also what's his name, the bald guys,
Jason Statham.
Jason Statham
Playing Handsome Rob.
That's right. I can't believe I forgot Jason Statham's name. But yeah, the fact that they're almost caricatures of characters from the original film in that respect, which once again goes back to the fact that it is very much a heightened American remake of a heist film. So it's just, it kind of comes with the territory. But a lot of that did kind of rub me the wrong way, I think. So, and that was one of those sequences that did. Yeah.
I feel, that the heightening only really worked in one case, and that was Edward Norton's character of Steve. Was it?
Steve.
Steve.
I think. What an intimidating name.
He kept changing his surname as well.
Ooh,
So,
Steve.
basically just referred to as Steve,
Yeah,
the entire
of
thing.
course.
So him playing the lecherous, sort of very evil, generic. I feel that kind of worked in its favor.
Yeah.
In the sense that it just made things a lot more cartoony. I think that also just purely came from the fact that Edward Norton didn't want to be there.
Well, yeah, so that's what I was going to bring up as well, basically. He was only here under contractual obligation, and I think that dismissiveness kind of shows in his performance, honestly. Once you're looking for it, you can tell that he doesn't seem to be putting in any significant acting effort into this movie beyond caricature smarmy villain, basically. Which, I mean, works fine in comparison to a lot of the other characters, because that's how the characters are written. But even so, I thought his performance was...
Oh yeah, you take that performance, put it in any other Edward Norton film, it'd be terrible.
Yeah, of course.
But in this one, I feel it just kind of worked because everything else was weirdly heightened.
Yeah, of course. Like, the fact that he was putting in so little effort weirdly fit in with the script in a way that I don't think was intentional, which I think was really strange, because it's just, once again, one of those happy accidents that I don't know if this movie intended.
Yeah.
But it's really quite odd. Yeah. Apparently Edward Norton is a dick. So from I've heard nothing but almost really terrible stories about him in regards to the films he gets involved with. So, yeah, not surprised he was dropped as the Hulk.
Yeah. Which, having seen Mark Ruffalo, I'm very glad.
It's very true. We ended up with the superior Hulk there, that's for sure. But, yeah.
Although it would have been nice to see a bit of Eric Bana come back.
Well, yeah, sure. Eric Bana's good, but that original movie is nothing special.
Oh, yeah, no.
Yeah. Anyway, that's a tangent. We'll have to do the Hulk films at another point. But, yeah, the other thing I wanted to talk about, particularly I referenced before that this film was absolutely a product of its time. One of the significant reasons that this film was even made as a remake was because the Ocean's 11 remake that came out a couple of years before, basically, which reinvigorated the original heist film, and was also a remake of a 1960s heist film. It means there's a lot of parallels there, basically. I even feel they're going for a very similar style, in that it's kind of like sort of stylish class while also being, tongue-in-cheek entertainment. I don't think it pulls it off anywhere near as well as the original Ocean's 11 film, because Steven Soderbergh just had such a great control over that film's tone. I think that film was also very important to talk about. Also the fact that this film, like The Italian Job, came out at a time where heist movies... there isn't the history there that we have to deal with today. And I feel like the remake of that kind of alludes to that history in the way that the original didn't. Because I think there are a lot of almost not explicit references to Ocean's 11 and other heist films, but I think they're definitely in there. Okay. I feel like there's a little bit of DNA from other heist movies that is kind of integrated into it over the course of the, 33 years between the original and the remake. So, yeah. Once again, it just kind of proves that it is very much a product of its time, so which I think is quite interesting.
Both of them are products of their time. I think that's the moral of this episode.
Yeah, absolutely. Which is why I think it's really interesting to talk about it as an adaptation, because it's basically taking the vague outline of a process, vague outline of a story, or just a heist, and then transposing it into incredibly different eras in incredibly different countries, which I think is, kind of interesting. So, are there any specific similarities we want to talk about in regards to the film?
I think we've covered a lot of the main ones with the traffic and the minis and the gold. There isn't a whole lot.
Wow.
The misogyny, maybe? Or do we just leave that alone?
Well, I mean, they tone it down a little bit for the remake, I think. I mean, Charlize Theron is still very much... There's a few shots in that I'm like...
Yeah.
But besides...
And the end credit sequence where you don't see it, but apparently Speaker blows a woman's clothes off.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of that real... they definitely kind of maintain the bro-laddie atmosphere from the original film. in a way which I don't think is very good in either of them, unfortunately. But hey, products of their time. You just got to take it the way it comes. It's unfortunate, but it's just kind of the way things fly. Yeah, especially in the original film. So
we've learnt from our mistakes.
No, we
Theoretic?
haven't.
No, we
really haven't. Yeah, no, this still happens in films today. Yeah. Let's be real. But it really it kind of goes back to the point that we made at the very beginning. This is a homage. This isn't a proper remake in that respect. There's only a few vague allusions, like none of the characters carry over or anything like that. You can maybe see some like broad references if you squint really hard between Mark Wahlberg's character and Michael Caine's character, but not really. Like, he's the ringleader and that's about it.
Probably the closest you get is when Michael Caine appears on cable TV briefly in the original film, playing the original film on a television, which adds a whole lot of weird
meta commentary. Like, does that film exist in a universe where the original Italian Job film exists?
Yeah, especially because they share the same name for both of the
of course.
Mark Wahlberg's and Michael Caine's character.
Yeah, is it like, I mean, is the reason that Mark Wahlberg even calls the Venice Job the Italian Job because he saw the original Italian Job film? Like, is this kind of a weird cyclical narrative in the fact that there's a film inside a film that's referencing the title of another film? It's just...
My brain hurts now. Yeah. Let's stop talking.
It's a whole other ballpark. That is interesting to think about, though. Do we want to move into Do It Differently?
Yes. Jingle, jingle,
jingle, jingle, jingles.
We lost it.
No,
we had it and we lost it.
I'm sorry. I was looking down at my phone. Do we want to try that again?
Yes. Okay. Fine. Jingle, jingle, jingle. It's not the same.
Yeah. No, I'm sorry. That's right. We'll get it next week. I'm sure. Do you want to go first, or shall I?
Sure, I'll go first. Right. Which is good. I'll be quick because there isn't a whole lot I can think to change. Because it is in that weird sort of balancing point, much like a bus on an edge of a cliff.
Hey.
If we sort of lean more into the adaptation, you get that worse sort of American comedy, which we know doesn't work, as we talked about in Death at a Funeral.
Yep. Please see our previous episode.
Yes, but if you lean too much away from it, it becomes just not an adaptation anymore. Not even homage. It's just another heist film that shares a name. So it's a weird sort of point that I was looking at, and I couldn't really think too much into it without just creating a whole new heist movie myself. So basically, my thoughts for Do It Differently are just small nitpicks. Fix up some of the characters, I reckon. Fix up some of the like broader things. So maybe tone it down, sort of the like. I don't know how to properly explain this because it is such an enigma of what we're talking about. But basically just Charlize Theron, I want more of her.
Okay.
Just so we can actually have a character.
Sure.
Give her a bit more of a backstory than just her father was the one that got killed.
I think you could even make her the protagonist, to be honest.
Yeah, I reckon that'd be a lot better.
Kind of build the film around her rather than Marky Mark.
And I reckon... Basically, I saw that scene in where she's working for the police as their sort of locksmith, jailbreaker type person. And I reckon I want to see that. I want to see that as a heist.
As in, like, what?
I want to see her sort of build up the trust with the police and then have this one big thing where it's a heist movie working with the police, but also trying to get revenge sort of on this character.
Yeah, right.
And so balancing that line of do you go full vigilante or do you try and stick to the book? And she isn't a she's just contracted by the police, so how much does she go by? I think that I think is the interesting way I'd sort of take this. And again, it wouldn't be an adaptation, unfortunately. It'd just basically be its own heist film. Yeah, because even at this point, you wouldn't really get the full Mini Coopers or the traffic jams. So yeah, new movie with Charlize Theron's character.
Yeah, fair enough. That is really interesting conceptually. I didn't even, frankly, I almost completely forgot that she was originally working with the police in the first proper scene we see with her. So yeah, no, I like that. It's good. It's good. For mine, like, mine's kind of, I'm probably going to lean more into the fact that it is a remake. And basically, one of the things that really bothered me about the remake that we've kind of talked about is the fact that it is so Americanized, essentially. And what I want to do is basically maintain that original British flavor. So not only keep it a British production and such, but there was actually a script or a draft of an actual remake written by the Bond screenwriters Neil Purvis and Robert Wade, but it was scrapped in favour of the two screenwriters who, as we talked about before, only wanted to homage the original. So I really think if you kind of leaned more into that script, kept it a purely British production, you can even allude to more contemporary British things, like where James Bond was at the time and things like that. Actually, no, the last James Bond film before that was Die Another Day, so we don't want to reference that. But basically keep it more quintessentially British and kind of like more of a faithful spirit to the original.
Maybe allude to like Sean Connery's Bond type films. Because he sort of seems like a nice equivalent to...
Sure. Classic
Michael
Bond.
Caine.
Without the misogyny.
Yeah.
I really think kind of one of the things that really loses from the original to the remake is the very much the cultured aspect of British sensibilities. And I think... it obviously would struggle in the fact that everyone would be comparing it to the original film in that respect rather than being different. But I also think it would make for probably a better movie overall. Even if it's not as good as the original, I think it would still be more interesting. So, yeah, that'd be the way I go for it.
So two very different sort of ideas.
Yeah, as
Mine
usual,
goes
actually.
more American and yours goes less American.
Absolutely. It is interesting. If we're going to talk sort of... broadly speaking, for a little while, different approaches to do it differently. In that we've had a couple that are vaguely similar, but for the most part, we tend to go in quite varying directions, which I do enjoy. So, yeah, no, it's interesting.
Almost like we planned it. We didn't.
No, we never talk about the doing
No.
it differently or anything before we actually sit down.
We
and
actually
record
keep it
these
as a
podcasts.
surprise.
Yeah, of course.
Which is why some of them end up so similar.
Yeah, of course. And so every time we're saying that's legitimately interesting, that is a genuine reaction, folks. There you go. Captured it live for your enjoyment. Not live. No, this is a podcast. It doesn't work that way. But you know what I mean.
Maybe if we eventually do a live episode
Yeah.
in front of a crowd. I'm thinking too far ahead.
No. Let's not worry about that. Anyway,
Let's just focus on the 3 viewers we've got at the moment.
or unknown amount of viewers at this point.
Yes.
But yeah, do we want to move into what we've been watching / reading / etc. recently?
Yeah, you've stopped trying to build on this now.
Yeah,
haven't
no,
you?
I think
Just-
I'm just going to stop with this bit. I'll come up with something this time. Who knows? Yeah. Yeah. So what have you got for us this week, Evan?
Well, I've been a bit busy, unfortunately, so I've sort of tried to look into things, but I did recently start, I haven't gone too far into it yet, but a nice little TV show called Vicious.
Oh, I don't think I've heard of this.
So I've only watched the first few episodes, but immediately after doing that, I went and bought out the DVDs.
Wow.
So
Okay, that's a good sign that you like it.
it's a British show, so it's only small, 2 seasons.
Oh, I see.
That was it. But it's Ian McKellen and Derek Jacobi playing an old gay couple
Oh,
who just trade barbs, basically.
so that's it. It's just the show is them making fun of each other.
Essentially, there is their younger neighbour, played by Ewan Reardon,
Oh, yeah, sure.
who was Simon in Misfits and some character in Game of Thrones. I don't know. I don't watch it.
Fair enough.
And a few of their other sort of supporting characters. But essentially, the main crux of it is Derek Jacobi and Ian McKellen just being an old married couple. Although not married because at the time, gay marriage.
Oh, when did this show come out?
It was only a few years
Really
ago.
interesting. I
But
didn't.
it was around the time where like the whole gay marriage debate in Britain was very starting up. And I think the last episode ends with a proposal or a marriage or something. I'm not entirely sure. I haven't got up to there yet.
Okay, sure.
Probably not the best one to talk about until I've actually finished it. But hey,
Sure.
I needed something.
It still sounds interesting. I'm surprised. I didn't actually know Ian McKellen had done any recent TV series. Good to know. I guess he needs to keep himself occupied between those Hobbit movies at some point.
Yeah.
Yeah, good to know. Okay, yeah, very cool. Okay, I mean, so for mine this week, I'm actually going to try and keep things on topic. It's kind of sprung to mind recently.
Oh,
And-
I see how it is.
Well, no. That's not what I
Kidding.
meant. That's not what I meant. But yeah, so I'm going to actually recommend a more recent heist film called Logan Lucky. So it came out in 2017, directed by Steven Soderbergh, the original director of Ocean's 11, which we referenced in this episode. But the way I would probably best describe it, it's kind of like a hillbilly version of Ocean's 11. And it's basically following a couple of what you assume is fairly stupid brothers trying to perform a heist at some grand racing event, essentially, and just all the trials and tribulations you go through there. I don't really want to spoil it, but it stars Channing Tatum, who's great. It has a fantastic supporting role from Daniel Craig. Like, probably one of my favorite performances of him I've ever seen. It's really funny. It's quite clever. I mean, obviously coming from Steven Soderbergh, it's quite a good heist film as well. And I think it's definitely worth a recommend for anyone who enjoys heist movies or Channing Tatum or just hillbillies in general. Yeah, this is a surprisingly good, very solid heist film of recent ilk.
Excellent.
Yeah, cool. Well, thank you to everyone who listened to this episode of Medium Shift. We can be found at mediumshift@gmail.com. Feel free to send whatever you so desire, be it, the actual desires of your heart or bitcoins. We've already used bitcoins. Can't do that one. I'll cut that out.
Just whatever it is, make sure it's legal.
Yeah, of course.
We don't want any laundered money or stolen bullions that can be traced back to us. We've got our own heist to worry about. We don't need yours.
Yep, fair enough. And until next time... Oh, wait, no. What are we doing next episode? We're going to be... That's right. No, next week we're not going to be coy about the way we're doing this because this is more of a recent, smaller film that we suggest everyone would see. But it is basically a kind of horror comedy meta film in the vein of Cabin in the Woods, shall we say? Called...
You Might Be the Killer.
Yes. So that's going to be an interesting one to talk about next week, considering it was adapted from a Twitter feud, funnily enough, or Twitter conversation at the very least. Yeah, but should make for a good episode. So until next time, fare thee well.
Bye.